Good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Lightfield, and I will be moderating this panel. And I figure, although everyone's complete bio is in the agenda thing that you got when you walked in, I would just run through who's who. So immediately to my left or to your right is Richard Epstein, who basically has a strong background in the performance and the musical side of the arts. And he is the one who gives us sound to much of the art stuff that we participate in. Then we have Jermaine. Jermaine I've known for a long time. He is an artist, entrepreneur, pioneer. He's been occupying vacant spaces and temporary spaces for many, many years, and I've had the pleasure of working with him on some of the projects that I have participated in. And then we have Fernando Alvarez, who I've begun working with in Stanford, and he has been doing some fantastic work in putting art, fine art and contemporary art from all over the world in corporate locations, and really pushing the envelope of how the public can interact with art. And at the very end of the table is Margaret Bodell, who I've known for a long, long, long time. Since 1982, she has been working in New Haven and throughout the state of Connecticut in producing various art initiatives in vacant and underutilized space, long before doing all of this stuff was hip and trendy. So, as a theme for giving spaces, giving arts a chance in temporary spaces, I thought that we would talk more about the why we do these things as opposed to the how that we do these things. When we think of places and we think of creative spaces, it's not just the buildings. It's not that the buildings are there. It's about the people that are in cities that make places, and it's about the people that these transformations attract and create lively areas that people want to be in. Not all of these spaces are always available, and everybody at this table has worked very hard at making what has been overlooked by many into something that everybody covets. And with that, believe that teed off first is a brief presentation by Fernando. So get over to Fernando.
I think it's Joe.
Is this thing working? Hello? Okay. Well, hi, I'm Jermaine. Like Jackie said, I'm an artist. I've been, working as sort of, my art takes place in two different worlds, I think. As an artist, I learned early that if I wanted to do art, I needed to do something that allowed me to do art. So I developed, I guess you could say, a commercial commodity, which is my clothing line, which is Culture Designs. And I also do fine art. I'm a visual artist. But in doing my clothing line, early on, I was given the opportunity to transform, well, maybe before I even started doing my first pop-up shops early in the early phases, myself and my partners developed, I guess, what would be more of one of the most resourceful ways of doing pop-ups, which is selling, clothing out of our cars. So we would ride around and, take our ideas that we, did on canvas and things of that nature, and just sell it in our communities. And from a particular real estate owner in South Norwalk, seeing us and seeing our passion in doing it, gave us the opportunity to use one of his spaces as a pop-up, like an incubator space. And that sort of gave us the opportunity to use the space as a boutique and develop our brand and push what we were doing into the future. Now, since then, like Jackie said, throughout time, I started to, excuse me 1 second, sorry. Throughout time, I started to use particular spaces. One, for instance, right now I'm using a space in South Norwalk at Elizabeth Street. It's 1 Elizabeth Street. This particular space, I was approached by a real estate owner who had actually moved out of the States and allowed me to come in and use the space for other people to develop, their particular ideas. So I use it as a pop-up space, and I allow other people to, excuse me, my throat, to use it in other fashions. I guess to touch on what Jackie was saying, as far as why do we do it, I mean, I guess it's more of survival. And I think most artists, after, a lot of the ideas of, making spaces cool and coming into urban spaces and making them viable, I think as artists, our main thing is being able to take our talents and survive off of them. So I think that's sort of a broad spectrum. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you, Jermaine. Next up, with the revised agenda in front of me, is Richard Epstein.
So I'm going to be talking primarily about performance spaces. That's music as well as theater. They have very similar needs when you perform outside of the usual space where you are. So as to Jackie's question about the why people want to perform outside of usual spaces, the word incubation really comes to mind. Sometimes things are not really fleshed out in performance, and they need either a second or third performance, or they want to develop something. And that's a very important thing for performances. So performances need, can you just go back? Performances need three things. They need a venue, they need the performers, and they need the audience. Okay. The venue has to be equipped some way. It can be a totally vacant space, or it can have things that can be used. It can be visible or not. There are a lot of spaces down in cellars or behind in alleyways. It needs to comply with local ordinances. It needs access and parking in spaces where people have to drive there. Usually needs access and an electrical source, and can be created out of virtually any space, okay? Here are some traditional performance spaces. I'm going to go through these sort of one by one, okay? So first there are concert halls. This is the Norwalk Concert Hall. And these spaces are available sort of one-time or two-time uses. They are very heavily utilized. They're expensive to run. And of course, when you put a large group in like that, the salaries are hugely expensive. Next. Recital halls are sort of the same thing, a little smaller. Connecticut has lots of examples of this, particularly in New Haven, at Yale and other universities. Then there are dedicated outdoor locations. This is a university in California. And the next one, of course, is the familiar space in Westport at the Levitt Pavilion. Schools are a great source of performance, but their limitation is most of them are really dedicated to performances by kids. Getting a school to give a performance space to an outside group is increasingly difficult. It used to be schools would bring in outside groups. When many of us were younger and went to school, they would have groups come in from outside, give performances for the kids and the faculty. To try and do that now is virtually impossible. They are programmed from morning till night, okay? Here's neighborhood schools in Bridgeport, right here. One of the places that's attempting to make up for the lack of school space, a very successful endeavor that is working very hard, okay? Churches, of course, are another space. Besides the religious aspect of it, they're used by many, many other groups. Here's the Southport Orchestra. And this is a WPKN event at the Unitarian Church in Westport, where we presented some Brazilian music. Libraries, of course, do the same thing on a large and a small scale. And they tend to cater to all ages. Churches do very much the same thing, but libraries in particular give a lot of chance for young people to attend. Museums and galleries. This, of course, is the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Temple of Dendur, but there are lots of smaller spaces. The Westport Arts Center holds many concerts there, and virtually every gallery space, including the studios in Bridgeport, do the same thing. Municipal auditoriums. This is Edmond Town Hall, what used to be Town Hall in Newtown, I believe, which is now pretty much a dedicated performance space. These can either be used as dedicated spaces here, or most town halls have municipal auditoriums where they hold various public forums, and a lot of them are not well equipped now for performances, but have a huge potential with a little bit of investment to make them good performance spaces with sound, lighting, and of course being able to darken the auditorium, which is a very, very critical step towards making performances realistic. Lots of parks. This, of course, is Washington Square in New York. That's a traditional space. And this is a big park in Bridgeport that was used for the Vibes for many, many years. Here are some alternative spaces that were temporary transformations that bring performances out of the box. These are some other uses of the world around us. There are performances in houses that are formalized. There's a very good example here of Beechwood Arts in Westport. And then there are much more informal gatherings. These come equipped with everything, the people, the facilities, food and drink if you want, and can be really exciting. Sidewalks. The streets themselves. Public plazas. This is at Lincoln Center, and if you look carefully, it's one of these painted pianos thing. They put them all over the streets of New York and then gathered them together for a concert in the plaza at Lincoln Center. Okay. There are moving spaces. I have a friend or two who have recorded albums on subways. Floating spaces. This also is in Bridgeport and Brooklyn, that is, in Dumbo. This is barge music, and you see the interior of there. It's small. It looks out on the skyline of New York City and used primarily for classical performances. This is a performance of water music on the water. And unexpected spaces. This is in an underground cavern, and they're doing bluegrass concert here. Shopping malls, public lobbies, indoor spaces, there are plenty of those, and this, of course, is FTC's warehouse in Fairfield. Restaurants, this was next door, actually, when it was Two Boots. And the pop-ups in various empty spaces. And recently, Play With Your Food held a gala in a boxing ring in Norwalk. The most unusual space I've been to. So here are a couple of examples of events I've participated in. When the Lockwood Mathews mansion was still young and being renovated, I sort of stumbled upon it, and in this beautiful lobby in the rotunda, this is after it was fixed up because a movie company came in and filmed there and gave them a huge amount of renovation. But while it was still really raw, I walked into that rotunda and I said, this is a place for a concert. So we held some chamber music concerts, and subsequently I brought the Norwalk Symphony in for a gala after it was fixed up. This was a period piece for Mozart, and we put the models up in that same rotunda, and we presented Peter SCHICKELE, or P.D.Q. Bach, and there's an example of his music on your right. This was the event as it was held there, very successful. Then everybody went to the concert hall for the actual concert itself. Chamber music in another of the rooms there. So that's an example of a museum space with a lot of possibilities. The next is Road and Tracks, which is presented now 3 times by WPKN, held inside an incredible showroom filled with beautiful, beautiful automobiles. Our first one was an evening celebration of 50 years of our broadcasting with live music and dancing. This is the poster from that. I'll give you a moment. And Road and Tracks 2, we decided to make it a benefit for young musicians, held in the night of a blizzard. Actually, it was scheduled for September, and we were very lucky to get a full house. Giacomo Gates and friends playing. He just sort of stopped by to sing with some of them. And if you look in the back, you see all those fantastic cars. So we just sort of held the event in this showroom, which was part a parking lot, and just some of the people from the event. Some more. Nice automobiles. Silent auction. Then we moved the event to a daytime, put up a tent next to the gallery, and we called it Cars and Guitars. We had displays of guitars from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, radios, and that sort of thing. So this was a use of what would normally be a garage with a little showroom attached. We can go ahead, David. Just some more photos from that. We did a live broadcast from there too. There's a tent we put up. As the event got bigger, we needed a lot more space. And WPKN also holds a record fair. We're going to be doing the 3rd one this year. The first one was held in the Fairfield Theater Company warehouse before it was converted, and we got special dispensation to use it during the day. There were thousands of collectible, used, and rare recordings, and it was extremely successful. We used some food and vendor trucks outside. So this is one of the warehouse-type spaces like St. Anne's. We had a lot of people there. That's the poster from that. We had live music in addition, and this is what it looked like during the day. We held it again at the Reed's Art Space in the lobby, which many of you will be going to see a little later. This turned out to be in the middle of another blizzard, but still got a lot of early birds here, so some more pictures from that. And finally, the benefit concert at the Antique Center on the Norwalk Westport line, the Antiques and Design Center. So people shopped for antiques. There you had a gallery space in which we did a concert. People had a great time that evening. It was one of the first events that they ever held that was more than just shopping. Some of it here. It's a 20,000 square foot antique and design center, and we had a great, great blues group playing there. It was very successful. So these last 2 slides will give you a good idea of the benefits and the problems of holding performances in unique spaces. There's always a unique feel to the event. It introduces new audiences, and I can add, allows a percolation of the creation, raising awareness and visibility of both the venue and the performing organization itself, the possibility to adapt existing performance material in fresh ways. That's the incubation, and increased PR, press, and marketing for the performer and the venue alike, so it benefits everybody. Some of the challenges are that there are many municipal codes, fire regulations. You know, you have to hire a policeman or the fire marshal. It adds to your costs right away. Liability, often you have to purchase a particular insurance policy for that day event or night event. And of course, parking, which is a problem everywhere. The facilities often lack things like a box office, the performer dressing rooms, restrooms, stage, or seating, and access to an electrical source is almost a given, sometimes not so easy. When we held the event at Dragon, we had to really run some awfully long electrical cords just to get us electricity in things like the tents. Sound and lighting may be difficult, and sound isolation, if you have a performance, is critical. I don't know if you've ever been to a performance where you can hear what's happening outside during those, silent as a pin drops moment. It's not very good. And the performer's technical setup has to be imported. So that's pretty much what it takes to put on an event outside of a space as well equipped as this. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Up next, we have Fernando Alvarez.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to thank Jackie Lightfield and Dave for the great work they're doing in the arts in the state, or Fairfield County. My slide? Oh, good, okay. My name is Fernando Luis Alvarez. I am the founder of the Eponymous Gallery located on Bedford Street in Stamford. We opened in 2009. Our mission statement has been to build artist careers from the doors in and community from the doors out. Next. Through building artist careers, we don't mean by selling art or showcasing art. We actually take it a step further, and what we do actually is position artists in the hands of important collectors and institutions around the world. We don't sell art. We pride ourselves in saying that we're positioning artwork and creating value investments for people. Because at the end of the day, it does come down to a value investment, which I'll briefly explain later on. On the community building side, we're very, very involved in funneling those individuals who collect artwork from us, their money and their knowledge, into the community. An example of that was the Yearwood Center in 2012, a very, very important institution, after-school program and community center for an underprivileged section of the city of Stamford that had been around for 70 years. In the city, in the community, we're ready to actually just let it decipher. And the reason behind that, they had a right to. There's 10 years of failing. And the gallery gave us, in our mission statement, and walking the talk in our mission statement, gave us the platform to actually go in there and do the necessary changes to save the institution. We not only remove management, which is a very difficult equation to do because of the history of the place, but also we're able to raise over $300,000 in less than 2 years and turn the place around. Today, it is partnered with the Boys and Girls Club of America in Stamford, and it actually remains in keeping the history of the place by still being known as the Yearwood Center in Stamford. Next. So as part of the building community, we thought that we would found Clementina Arts Foundation. And part of it is the Sprouting Spaces, the reason why I'm here today. Sprouting Spaces was founded in 2010. And basically what we do is turning commercial vacancies into art studios. Next. So we saw that there is a need, a synergistic need. Artists needed space. The landlord had a vacancy that looked terrible for his bottom line, especially with banks who do not want to see that a landlord who they loan a lot of money to has a lot of vacancies. In the community, they needed the cultural equity. So we saw the need, and we went for it, and I think that at the beginning, it really starts with the bottom line on the artist. It really comes down to the artist. They're the value investment here, and communities and developers have to start seeing the artists from a different angle, more than just artists. They bring tremendous value, and I'll go into that in my last slide. But benefits of the Sprouting Space, and an example we had, starting with the artist, We have an artist, his name is John J. Bedoya, who's currently really, really enjoying stardom. Because of that sprouting space, he was able to land a very prestigious and important residency in the Amazon, representing Latin America. Over 300 artists applied to that, and he got it. As well, it helps as a platform for you to better market and show the talent of the artist. We had brought important collectors to that studio. As well, we brought in major institutions like the Tate in London. We had a dinner for the Tate in London, and the artist being the center of attention in his own studio. All of that adds to value and empowerment to the artist in many ways, including the work they're churning out. In that studio, this artist developed some works that will now be participating in the Venice Biennale 2017, May through November of 2017 in Venice, Italy. So that's just an example of how empowering it could be when we provide artists with their biggest obstacle, and that is space. Now, as for the landlord, this particular property was empty for 10 years in the downtown of Stamford. Within 12 months, it was rented, and because of us. Somebody brought in somebody who needed a space, they opened, now they're gonna open up in sometime this month or next month. Another one, so, you know, a lot of these places, and artists in particular, in these hubs, serve as great marketing for developments, and developers and communities. Through social media, in another one of our spaces, somebody saw the pictures of the space, and they came in, and they ended up renting the space. For us, we don't see that as gentrification, because that is what the artist came in there to do. It was a deal, he understood it, 6 months to a year, or until the place would rent out, and he moved on. We got him another space somewhere else, and the landlord rented the space. It's good for the landlord, and in the meantime, it was very good for the community, because the artists serve as a gold mine. They are magnets and builders of affluence, and therefore economic activity and growth within communities. Next. So what community and leaders really don't get, and you know, community leaders and landlords don't really grasp, is what I call the goldfish effect. Goldfish, when you put them in a bowl, they grow in proportion to the size of the bowl. And I see that in artists, you know, when I give them a studio, and you know, artists need space, and not small space. Because to start with, it's a health hazard to be smelling all those fumes coming out of your paints. Not to mention all the resins and all the stuff they use when they do sculpture. They need space. They also need space because artists don't just work on one thing. They're not a factory. They need different little spaces throughout the studio to do different ideas and create different canvases and whatnot. Even within the same series, they need to work. They need to better produce work. They need to have more than just one particular, you know, canvas. They could do more at the same time, and that becomes even, you know, more effective for the artist. But their work also grows in size. This artist that we were talking about surprised us with a 27-foot by 9 feet tall painting. Now, the Tate is interested in buying that artwork. And that is not only important to the artist, but it's also important to the gallery. And the gallery gives back to the community, and it's also important to the community because when it goes to the Tate, it's gonna have the reference of the gallery located in Stamford, Connecticut. So that's how it creates kind of a domino effect of value add to the community. And I think we have to start seeing this more as a return on involvement. You know, it equals to luring the very right people. When you lure the very right people, it empowers economic activity, social activity, and that turns into a value investment in the long term, not only for the developer, but for the community. We can't just have buildings with sheetrock in what they call luxury apartments, charging a lot of money, which are all inflated, by the way. I mean, you look at the finishings of these apartments that they call luxury, it's ridiculous. And the prices they're actually charging. If developers think that that is sustainable, you know, they know to begin with it's not sustainable. But maybe a lot of them don't care because they're in the business of flipping. They get the low interest loan from the bank, and they're riding the economic wave of real estate. They flip it, they leave, and it's the cities that are now stuck with those vacancies. So hopefully these are the times where our political leaders and our legislators start developing legislature to do more for the arts, because I sincerely don't think they're doing it. It is individuals like the First Lady who spoke here today, individuals like the people putting this together who are really actually, with the sweat of their palms, making ends meet for the art culture, which is a value investment. Cities around the world that understand this have gone very far. I can name a few: Berlin, Miami, San Francisco. Let me get my water. Chicago's doing it as well. There's some in Scotland. Ireland is also doing very good work with that. The French really understand cultural equity too. You know, we work with the Louvre. We had a one-man show there for Joseph Kosuth. Recently, they acquired it. We managed a way to land it into the Louvre indefinitely. The gallery's name is in the Charles V Hall in 4 plaques. And under it is Stamford, Connecticut. When you have 6 to 9 million people walk through that hall every year, that's a lot of brand equity. And it's not just for the gallery or for the artist, it's for the city of Stamford. That just goes on to say the phenomenal value investment that the arts really represent. Do I have another one? Now, this leaves us with what truly, truly matters, and what's really important is what we're not getting. As a community, we should now be, a city, Stamford, that boasts, and I use the city of Stamford because that's where I operate out of, that boasts being one of the best small cities in the country. I mean, I laugh at my colleagues when they actually say that, you know, because it's not. When you don't have the arts to a certain level, you're not one of the best small cities in the country, okay? The city of Stamford has to, and many other cities around here, have to begin investing in the arts. They have to see the value. The real value here is how they see artists. You know, I'm beginning to think that they see us like roaches. You know, roaches, you can drop an atomic bomb and they just continue to exist. So they're probably saying, you know what, they'll continue to exist. We might as well ride them at our convenience, you know? But what's turning, what's changing now, is the artisanal appeal is the next growth in retail. I've been talking about that for the last 10 years. The cheese shop, the handmade, the guy who does leather shoes by hand, fixes them by hand, the seamstress, the farmer's market, which we know is already very popular. But that's the next wave of retail growth in America. And who better than artists? And seeing them in the sprouting space or the empty space that was provided to them by a landlord, to see them in the raw concept of artisanal appeal. That is the next phase. And cities and developers have to work together and come into terms on how they're going to do it. Whether it is through tax incentives, maybe not taxing them for that space if they give it to an artist, or maybe taxing them. You know, if they have an empty vacancy, a vacancy for more than a certain period of time. But really what it comes down to is this: artists, they're dialogue creators, they're important creatures to society. They are every day looking at the world from a different angle. They help us to think differently. Studies show that if you expose children at an early stage to the arts, when they turn around 15 to 16, they actually start doing a lot better in pretty much any field, any sector, or any classroom they chose to actually focus in. And that goes on to say the power of the arts. So it's very empowering, very important. Artists are an under the radar, tremendous investment for landlords, communities, and humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando.
Sorry.
And now we have Margaret Bodell. Margaret, do you want the wireless mic?
Hey, everybody, and thanks so much to David and Jackie for putting this together. I was hoping it could be an annual event or quarterly or something can come of it because it's so important what we're all talking about. So I'm going to talk about creative workforce development. I have been passionate about taking over spaces that are underutilized and passionate about unseen populations in our society, such as persons with disabilities, which are the largest minority in the world. In the state of Connecticut, there's 500,000 people who are on some sort of social service disability schedule. So my work involves taking over buildings and employing artists in our community who are deeply impoverished usually. As I did the storefront programs for the state, the one thing I can tell you is a lot of people couldn't do the project because they don't have any income. Our artists need work to make this whole program work. So employing artists to work with unseen populations and provide a creative route for meaningful income is the crux of what I was talking about. Let's see, Jackie was talking about why do we do this? I do it because it's a civil rights issue. To not provide a place where everyone could tap into the arts and explore it. You know, that is the thing. People who are impoverished can't afford to go to an arts college, can't afford to go anywhere. And people like Suzanne at City Lights, who provide this kind of opportunity and bring social service programs to the forefront, bring them out of the back rental spaces and right to the main street. Artists working together with these populations, it's a beautiful thing. In New Haven, there's East Street Arts, which is a beautifully new branded building. The organization owns the building, so no one's going to get displaced. In Southington, they took over a municipal building, and the whole second floor is devoted to training our Connecticut artists to work with people with disabilities, returning veterans, reentry people, newly arriving Americans, to say, hey, are you creative? And try and tap into that so that they can find alternative work. Transitioning kids out of high school who have a disability like autism, they're gonna go home and watch TV and not have any contact with the outside world. There's a lot of time, there's no jobs. A lot of the job training centers fail because they're just too sensitive to that kind of environment, but in the arts, they flourish, they excel. So it's the beginning of the creative workforce field. In West Virginia, there's the coal field development, which is retraining coal miner populations to work back in the artisan tradition in the Appalachia. So there's little small pockets of creative workforce development. Certainly Massachusetts, California are way ahead, but here in Connecticut we are making some progress. It's slow. Recently we convened all of the art studio programs that work with people with disabilities on the East Coast to band together to change the law that people can attend this, and it could be seen as a vocational choice. Usually it's training for janitorial work or shop and stuff, you know, that kind of grocery stuff. So choices, civil rights, and empty storefronts all together. Thanks.
Thanks, Margaret. Before we go into the questions from the audience portion of this, and Dave is going to give us a cue on the time on this, I thought one of the themes that emerged from all of our panelists who have been doing great work in activating a lot of private space, and I'm hoping that some of you can expand on the difficulties of relying on privately owned space to do your work, and maybe touch on how many times you've had to move to a different location after losing that private space. And Margaret's already smiling, so I think she's teed up for that one. Margaret?
Well, I'll give one example. In Torrington, we took over a beautiful historic hardware store, and the owner was from New York and really gave us a chance for 6 months. And we had a theater company, all the rooms rented. We went in there and cleaned all the pigeon from the 3rd floor. We really had something going. It was amazing. And then after a year, one of the local real estate folks started talking to the owner and saying, you know, that's going to be worth a lot of money. They're putting in a new courthouse. So a year, 2 years worth of work, a dream vanished. But now I know that we're going to have a panelist later from Torrington who can talk about, you know, a resurgence. So every time you get pushed down, you just get up and take another storefront over and see if you can make some progress.
Fernando, Jermaine, you want to talk about the moving from spaces?
Yeah, well, one of my, you gotta excuse me, sorry about earlier, I had a little throat attack thing happening. But one of my earliest experiences, my first studio space, I don't know how many people are familiar with the Marshall Street, used to be the Marshall Street Studios in Norwalk, Connecticut. But I was one of the first artists that helped sort of move into that building and make it, really like a viable resource for the arts community in South Norwalk at the time. I mean, you go to South Norwalk now and it seems like it's, sort of bustling and a lot's going on. But at that time, there really wasn't much happening, especially with the arts. So at that time, we had developed a small arts community, and it had flourished for a while, even from when I had moved in. But then, Fernando and a lot of people are saying, a lot of real estate developers started looking at it and saying, hey, this could be a great space for office, office spaces or whatever. And, we tried to save the building. We even had, I think I might have seen Bill. Bill, are you here? Yeah, Bill Krause actually was a great component in trying to save the building. So we tried to get it, historically preserved, and went through a lot of stuff. And it sort of pretty much fell through, but a lot of the efforts that helped try to save that particular space went into what is now the Reed space in Bridgeport. It's an art space, which was a nonprofit, I believe, art subsidizing establishment. They put in efforts to try to save our building, but, since that fell through, then, we looked at, or Bill found the Reed space, and that actually created this community here. But, I mean, that was one of my sort of, strongest, efforts and most grueling efforts to try to save art space that, so many people had started, to call home. But I think, things sort of worked out from that. I have about 10 other stories, but that's one of my
Great.
strongs.
Fernando, Richard, do you want to tackle that one? No?
Richard, go ahead.
Well, the advantage of performance space is, of course, that it's very temporary. But there are examples of music schools that have opened in people's homes. Of course, Beechwood Arts, as I mentioned, in Westport, holds regular events there. They've committed themselves to that. So it's not as much of a problem for the performance. Theaters, however, they need a space to store a lot of their costumes and props and things like that. They have more difficulty than anybody.
Yeah, well, gentrification will happen. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Unless the artists become successful within that period of time and start making 6-digit numbers per average on sales of their work, because usually artists, it's like a paradox. They come in and they build the community. The arts adds a lot of value to property development. We raise prices over time. That's seen in Soho and many other areas around the world and around the country. So unless that really happens, their prices going up significantly, which takes time for an artist to develop their prices. Gentrification will continue to happen. What's interesting here is that we know that communities depend on that. Sustainability, quality of life, which is what really makes a community, will depend on the arts. So what needs to happen here is I think the artist community really has to get organized, We have to become an important, powerful lobbying group and actually get legislators involved in the roundtable with developers, and actually start developing permanent, per building, per property, per whatever amount of land you own in the downtown or wherever it is that you own it. You have to develop something permanently. And if it even becomes at a discount, it's not really at a discount, because whether it's a gallery that you put in there or whether there's an artist in there, over time, when you add up all the marketing awareness, when you add up the quality of like that artist or that institution is bringing to the community, it's actually, it comes out of marketing for you. So, but it really, I think what we have to do is become organized. Artists have to be, the artist community has to become organized, create a lobby, a powerful lobbying group, not a disorganized, artist-run lobbying group, a very focused one with money behind them, or at least votes behind them. Get organized, let one leader do it. Sometimes it's difficult to put a bunch of artists together in one room and work together because it's just nothing really happens. There's a lot of passion involved, you know. But that's what we need. And I think that in Stanford, through our gallery, we were able to do a lot of that, you know, and through the DSSD, of course. I put a lot of pressure on the DSSD on investing in art, you know. How you know, the quality of art it is, I don't know yet, but little by little we're doing more and more. And it's nothing new. This is being done in cities where the arts works. Miami, again, is a great example. Berlin is a great example. These places will be cultural hubs for the rest of our lives because they have put it set in stone through legislation, okay? And their lobbyist groups who got together, the people who got together and organized to push for that. That is the only way gentrification is not going to happen, because developers still don't get it. They're in the business of real estate, rightfully so. They borrow big money, they take big risks, they don't get it. They don't want to waste, they don't want to wait for the value investment to develop. So again, that is what we need to do, I believe, in order to actually eliminate gentrification from happening and keeping these wonderful geniuses in communities and in our lives.
Great, thanks, Fernando. We're going to switch over to questions from the audience. David just gave us a 5-minute thing. I just want to touch on something that I think all of the panelists here highlighted. All of them have been involved in opening spaces. They all are artists or performers themselves. But they open these spaces and they incubate and encourage other artists to participate in the projects that they're working, whether it's Margaret with her invisible disabled community, or Jermaine working in a lot of impoverished areas and working with a lot of kids. Fernando's work with the Yearwood Center and Richard's work with Norwalk Youth Symphony and so on. I think that's you know, an untold story and maybe a good story for next time. But now we will take some questions from the audience, and I think David is wandering around with the microphone somewhere.
I can yell.
Okay.
I have really good voice protection. So, hello, I'm Natalie Price. I work on every level that you guys do. I know Jermaine because I remember him from high school. So culture, that's like almost 15 years ago. So, I mean, that takes work to build up. So kudos to you. I remember that. But Fernando, you really spoke about, what I like what you spoke about is that I have a lot of artists that are my clients, and they don't get the business. Like, they paint something, they're in love with it, they're like, it's so beautiful, and I'm like, how much does that cost? Well, it's beautiful. Well, how many hours did you put into it? How can we start attaching, really understanding business? And I think what you said about organizing and legislature, I think what needs to really happen is that we need to start paying attention to the dollars that artists bring into a community. And there needs to be somebody that represents the artists on that can say, you know, you may not think that we were of value, but last year, this is what our projects brought to your community in dollar signs. Because everybody understands the language of money. I think that the art, it's beautiful, we love it, I love it, but there is always a bottom line. And how can we show that when we are trying to promote ourselves or get our work in different areas, or even take over buildings and make that building permanently an art building, we have to see that return on that investment. That is, if we have to show it in human capital, or if we even have to show it in money that was brought into the community from the project. So just kind of a little bit more of a business aspect to it, so that you can have data to support what you all do that we enjoy.
Great. That's a great question. That's a great question. You know, and it really comes down to my last slide. It comes down to the representatives of artists are artists. Just like real estate guys are real estate guys and lawyers are lawyers. Okay, artists are artists. That's what they know how to do best. Let them do that. And smart artists, that's what they do. They find a representative, and the representative's job is to, what I depicted in that slide, to create of these geniuses a value investment, because that's the language that a greedy lawyer would understand. I love lawyers, not really, but you know, a finance guy would understand, a real estate guy, that's the lingo. So the representatives have to talk their lingo and really, really stand ground behind why this artist's work is worth what it's worth. And there's ways of doing that, even at the emerging level. We have models in our gallery as to how we go about, you know, pricing, which is critical in their success. But also we have a leasing program for the city of Stamford and other, actually now we're doing other cities around the country. You'd be surprised how people try to, you know, developers call you all excited, you know, I have this wonderful building, you know, these great walls, and they want free art. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. You know, and so you as the individual managing their careers, or whoever it is they're dealing, that is the middle person for the artist, have to turn that into a value investment and educate them on why it is not free. Okay? Does that answer my question? Your question? Good.
Mark Hannon. I'm with the Coastal Arts Guild of Connecticut in Stratford. I just wanted to briefly address Natalie's question, because as artists, like it or not, when we put our artwork for sale, it becomes a commodity, and that's basically a failure of our art education institutions for not giving artists the tools on how to affix a value to their art, to be able to market it, to understand the time and labor that went into it and justify the prices we have. But then just towards the end of your talk, Fernanda, you were talking about working with the DSSD, and it made me realize that in Stratford in Town Hall we have an economic development department. How receptive have you found the economic development departments in various towns to talking to artists about helping them to find space?
They don't get it. They don't get it. I think even with all the respect to the board, to the DSSD, I sit on the board, I have tremendous respect for the organization. What they've done in the city of Stamford is really, really magnificent. If you go back 20 years to what it used to be. But even our board doesn't get it. They don't get it. They're a bunch of real estate guys. You know, I mean, and they really got to step up to the plate on that, even in the city of Stamford. You know, so you just mentioned they need education, but they don't even have the time to give you, you know, for you to educate them. But guess what, guys? Artisanal appeal is coming back. That was made with love industry. That is coming back. The whole mold thing is really, really beginning to disappear or being turned into more an artisanal appeal kind of concept. That means that Main Street will now, over a period of time, will now start turning into more of made with love. And that's where artists, the artist community comes in, from galleries to studio, you know, spaces in vacant spaces. That's when that starts popping in. And I think eventually that's what's going to force a lot of these developers to start rethinking their thinking in regards to artists. Now, I constantly talk to experts in the field of real estate, because I do believe in the mixed use of the arts and commercial real estate. And we're actually heading in that direction. We're in the process of acquiring a tremendous property, a huge property, over 70 acres of land, to turn it into something very, very interesting. And so I was recently talking to the world CFO of one of the top 3 banks in the world. He's the head of real estate. And he was telling me that Stanford is 40% overcrowded in terms of apartments and stuff like that. So he said to me, what that means is that eventually, these places will be vacant and prices will go down, and that's when bankruptcies begin to happen. So when bankruptcies begin, what happened with the guy who's playing hardball, because they don't get it. It's not necessarily that they just don't want to do it. They just don't understand it, nor do they want to give you the time for them to understand it, which is where they should be blamed for. They should at least give you the time. So what's going to happen is that a lot of these developers, some of them will start folding. It already happened in Stanford recently. And hopefully that's when you get in with your story, with your value investment, which is your artist. Never, ever doubt that. You're bringing tremendous value to the community. And a lot of the times for very little money, because guess what? It's a different type of wealth.
We have one last urgent question, if we can have a quick response to this, because we're running out of time.
More of a statement. New Haven gets it. I was a participant at the invitation of Margaret Bodell 6 years ago for creative entrepreneurs called Project Storefronts. And my current business, which is a nonprofit I helped to found EcoWorks, CT.org. We're a material reuse center for the arts and a re-boutique. So artists can learn how to be business people. Artists can learn how to start a nonprofit. It takes the dedication that you have for your creative impetus. You need to apply that to your own learning experience. And I was definitely blessed by being given 3 months of free rent in a space as Elm City Handmade to be a consignment shop for makers. It was a successful run, as Margaret mentioned. Many people could not afford to participate in that project. I broke even and closed. But out of that, I started a 5-year trajectory to bring us to we now rent 1,400 square feet in an old, it was a hair salon. It's a storefront in New Haven between Make Haven and Cafe 9 on State Street. And it's a fabulous place. In 2 years, in 1 year, our lease will be up. We could probably use 4,000 square feet, but can't afford it yet. If you don't know what a material reuse center is for the arts, it's like a secondhand store for art supplies. And all donation-based, we retail. And I think that's the type of creative business that can be successful. There's one in each of the 50 states. I just recently came back from a conference in Somerville, Massachusetts, International Conference on Reuse. It's an important idea whose time is now. So there are success stories in the room. It's not all doom and gloom for artists. We need to learn how to apply ourselves to these situations. And adaptive reuse for spaces is very exciting. So we have to open our minds. Thank you so much. Thank you, Margaret.
Just the accent on that, and even the first part of your, I forget who asked Mark. I think the model as artists needs to change, just like, real estate developers, everybody sort of needs to change their model. I think being an artist, a main component of that, I mean, you have to go into what you're going to have to do to survive as an artist. I mean, like somebody said, you go to art school and you learn to just be an artist, just sort of floating around in the clouds. I mean, a lot of people, it's hard to develop that, but I think you have to, that's a part of being an artist. If you want to be a mechanic, you have to learn certain things to be a mechanic. If you're going to be an artist, you need to know how you're going to be able to survive off your art and your talent. I mean, unless you can find the proper agent. And even at that point, you still need to know what your worth is and how to create your value. So I think we need to change models across the board if all of this is going to work. you know, but that's my 2 cents.
Okay, David wants to keep us on target here. He said that he would appreciate if you just go on break to get coffee and come right back because we're running a little late. I do want to thank all of our extraordinary panelists here, not only for participating in this panel, but for all of the wonderful work that they do. And I want to thank David for organizing this. And with that, there's a less than 5-minute break that we have, and then the panels will resume.